memory is nothing but the repository or storage area where we can able to store the data as well as output. So before going to execute any program or any data, that must be present in the main memory. The two main type of RAM are static RAM and dynamic RAM. Hello to all, a warm welcome to my new session on Fundamentals of Computer. I am Revati from the Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, first grade, College Temple of Excellence, MYSURU, and my today's topic is computer memory. Before going to start this topic, let me to recall the things what I have covered in my last session. So dear student, in my last session, I started with output device, that is what is output device. Along with that, I have discussed monitor as well as printer. But in my today's session, I'm going to deal with computer memory. In that, I'm going to deal with primary memory as well as secondary memory. Anyway, dear student, let's see what is computer memory. Before that, let me to consider simple example here. If I consider human brains, all the informations are stored in the human brain. Similarly, if I consider computer system, all the data are stored in the memory. So what is this memory? Memory is nothing but the repository or storage area where we can able to store the data as well as output. So memory is an essential component of any digital computer, and it is a storing device or repository, or I can able to consider asset. So what is memory? It is nothing but the storing device, and it is capable to store programs as well as data which is required by the CPU. That means when I enter any data to the computer system, that data is stored in the computer memory, and same data is requested by the CPU for further execution. So here memories are classified into two main types, that is primary memory as well as secondary memory. So dear student, this primary memory is once again classified into RAM and ROM, and this RAM is further classified into static memory, dynamic memory, EDO RAM. So here ROM is classified into PROM, EPROM, flash memory, etc. Now, if I go with secondary memory, this secondary memory is classified into magnetic tape, USB flash, along with that optical disk. So here magnetic disk is once again classified into hard disk, floppy disk, and if I consider optical disk, it is once again classified into CD-ROM, DVD-ROM and BD-ROM. That is nothing but Blu-ray disk. Now, dear student, there are two kind of memory. So when we talk about memory, there are two type of memory, that is primary memory and secondary memory. And dear student, please remember one thing, that primary memory is always semiconductor memory and secondary memory is always magnetic memory. The storage capacity of a computer is measured in terms of bytes. So dear student, here the storage capacity of a computer is measured in terms of bytes. So here 1 byte includes total number of 8 individual unit is called bits. So here memories are measured in terms of byte. So what is this byte? That is nothing but 8 bits. So what is this bit? Here bit is nothing but 0 or 1. That means I can able to have 0 or 1, and this is known as bits. So here 1 bit can able to store either 0 or 1. So dear student, further I am going to have primary memory. So here memories are classified into two types, primary memory and secondary memory. So what is primary memory? Primary memory is nothing but semiconductor memory, and it's also called by the name main memory, and it is capable to store programs and data. Now the question arises, what kind of data it's going to store? So here all the data which is required by the CPU for further execution, those kinds of data are stored in the main memory or in the primary memory, because we have only limited capacity. For that reason, which program or which data which is required by the CPU, those data are mainly stored in the main memory. So it stores the programs and data which are currently needed by the CPU. So which kind of data we are going to store here? That is, which is frequently or currently needed by the CPU. Those kinds of data are stored under primary memory, and the size of the main memory is very small than secondary storage device or secondary memory. So here the CPU communicates directly with the main memory. So here CPU is going to communicate directly with the main memory. Now let me to draw the memory first. So dear student, think that this is my main memory and this is my secondary memory. Secondary memory. Now, dear student, think that there are some programs as well as data stored in the secondary memory. For example, say P1.C. Now, think that the CPU want to execute P1.C. But before going to execute that program or data, that must be get from the secondary storage to main memory. So what is the first job? Get this file or program which is stored in the secondary storage device to main memory. Now the CPU can able to execute this program 1.C. So before going to execute any program or any data, that must be present in the main memory. So as the CPU works at high speed, because here CPU works at high speed and its matching memory must be very fast, because here the execution speed of the CPU is very fast. And if I compare with the program which is stored in the secondary memory, and the execution speed of the secondary memory is very low. So to match the execution speed of CPU, what I want to do? I want to get all the data or all the files which is stored in the secondary memory to primary memory. So only primary memory device can provide the matching speed. Now I want to balance the speed between CPU as well as primary memory. So that reason I'm going to get the data which is stored in the secondary storage to primary storage. Here, RAM and ROMs are the main memory of the computer. That means main memory is further classified into two types, that is random access memory and read-only memory. Moving further, I'm going to have random access memory. So it is RAM. So what is this RAM? Randomly I can able to access the data which is stored in the memory. So randomly accessing means what? I can able to write the data, at the same time I can able to get the data, or I can able to modify the content which is stored in the random access memory. So here RAM is also called main memory of a computer system. This is really the main store. That means the RAM is nothing but the repository or main repository. It's going to provide the place to store the data temporarily. Now tell me what kind of data I'm going to store in random access memory. That is temporary data I'm going to store in that memory. When the CPU runs a program, it fetches the program instruction from the RAM. That means, suppose if I want to fetch any data or instruction, that data and instruction must be present in the RAM. If the CPU needs to store the result of the calculation, then once again we are going to use RAM. That means after the execution of the program, I want to store the output. And where I am going to store the output? In my random access memory. When we switch off a computer, whatever stored in the RAM get erased. That means when I turn off the computer system, or if there is any power fluctuation, that time whatever the content which is present in the random access memory is get erased. So it is also called volatile form of memory. That means when I turn off the system, whatever the content which is stored in the random access memory is get erased. For that reason, it is called volatile. And there are three type of RAM, that is extended data output RAM, static RAM, as well as double data rate RAM. Now I'm going to have my second type of memory, that is read-only memory. So as the name itself indicates that I can able to read only the content which is present in that memory. So here ROM stands for read-only memory, and all the informations which is stored in the ROM is predefined instruction. So now tell me, who is responsible for predefining the instruction or predefining the data? That is none other than manufacturer. That means during the manufacturing time, the data are written into the read-only memory. So the information is pre-recorded into ROM chip at manufacturing time, and once the data has been written into the ROM chip, it cannot be erased, but we can able to read. That means once the data is written into the read-only memory, then I can able to read the data n number of times, but I cannot able to write the data. And when I turn off the computer's system, whatever the content which is present in the ROM does not get erased. For that reason, it is called non-volatile memory or permanent memory. So here RAM stores critical programs. Now the question arises, what kind of programs are stored in the ROM? That is the program which is required by the computer system to start up. That is nothing but the bootstrap programs are stored in the read-only memory. Now, the read-only memory is further classified into three types, that is programmable read-only memory, erasable programmable read-only memory, and electrically erasable programmable read-only memory. Now, dear student, let's discuss the difference between RAM and ROM. So, what is this RAM? RAM stands for random access memory, whereas ROM stands for read-only memory. And RAM allows the computer to read the data quickly. So here RAM allows the computer to read the data quickly. To run applications, it allows reading and writing, whereas ROM stores the program which is required to start up the computer system. Now here RAM is volatile. That means when I turn off the computer system, which are the content which is stored in the RAM, that get erased. Suppose if I go with ROM, the contents are not get erased. For that reason, it is called non-volatile, where RAM is volatile memory. The two main type of RAM are static RAM and dynamic RAM. And if I go with ROM, it includes programmable read-only memory, electrically erasable programmable read-only memory, or programmable read-only memory. Now, I'm going to have secondary storage. Now, dear student, tell me why I required secondary storage device when I have primary storage. So, dear student, the size of the primary storage devices are very less comparatively secondary storage device. Now, when I have large amount of data as well as program, in that time I'm going to prefer secondary storage device. And since the storage capacity of the primary memory is not very large and cannot able to hold large amount of data, including programs which may be need for processing, thus secondary storage device is necessary. Now, the secondary storage device is used as auxiliary memory. So, it is auxiliary memory, and the secondary memory is used for bulk storage or mass storage of programs, data and other information, and larger capacity than main memory. That means the size of the secondary memory is always larger than primary memory. So, dear student, the size of the secondary memory is always larger than primary memory, but the execution of secondary storage devices are very low. So, in order to match with CPU execution, before going to execute any data, the data must be brought from the secondary storage device to primary storage device. The secondary storage or secondary memory retains the information once stored on it. So, whatever the data or information I'm going to store in the secondary storage device, that for longer time. The best example here is I can able to consider hard disk drive, compact disk drive, or pen drive, memory cards, etc. For that reason, it is called magnetic memory. So what is the another name for secondary storage device? That is auxiliary memory or magnetic memory. And the average time required to reach a storage location and obtain the content is called access time. So what is access time here? The average time required to reach the location where the data is stored and obtain the data from that location is called access time. Then what is example for secondary storage or secondary memory? That is magnetic tape, hard disk, floppy disk, memory cards. These are the example for secondary storage or secondary memory. Now let's see the difference between primary memory as well as secondary memory. So what is primary memory? Here primary memory is also called semiconductor memory because it is made up of semiconductors. And if I go with secondary memory, it is called magnetic or optical memory. And the primary memory is always volatile memory. That is nothing but temporary memory. That means I can able to store the data temporarily. And if I consider secondary memory, it is called non-volatile memory and it is permanent memory. That means whatever the data I'm going to store in my secondary memory is treated as permanent memory. Now, the primary memory, it is expensive. And if I consider secondary memory, then it is very less expensive and the execution speed is high, so it is faster. If I go with secondary memory, the execution speed is very slow. And the primary memory is also called main memory, whereas the secondary memory is also called auxiliary memory. Now, the example for primary memory is RAM and ROM, and if I consider secondary memory, hard disk, pen drive, etc. So, these are the difference between primary memory as well as secondary memory. Now, dear student, in my today's session, I started with what is memory. Along with that, I have discussed the two type of memory, that is primary memory as well as secondary memory. Now, let's meet in the next session with the new concept, that is an operating system. So, dear student, let's meet in the next session with the new topic, operating system. Until that, keep watching and keep learning. Thank you.